The most dangerous mistake a person can make is judging someone's worth before learning their name. The morning air in Arlington, Virginia, carried the crisp promise of early fall as commuters hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups in hand. Taxis rolled past government buildings, and the distant silhouette of the Pentagon stood against a pale blue sky, like a silent guardian watching over the nation's capital. For everyone else, it was just another ordinary Tuesday. For one man, it was the beginning of a day that would test not only his patience, but the character of everyone around him. Marcus Ellison walked alone through the downtown streets wearing a simple charcoal jacket, dark jeans, and polished brown shoes that revealed nothing about the extraordinary life he had lived. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his posture straight without appearing rigid, and every step reflected decades of discipline rather than pride. There was nothing flashy about him, no medals pinned to his chest, no military escort, no signs announcing that he was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army. He had spent an entire career believing that true leadership never demanded attention. It earned respect quietly. In his inside pocket rested a secure identification badge and a sealed folder containing briefing documents for a classified meeting scheduled less than an hour later inside the Pentagon. The meeting involved senior defense officials discussing matters that would never appear on television or in tomorrow's newspapers. Time mattered, yet Marcus never rushed. He acknowledged strangers with a courteous nod, paused to allow an elderly couple to cross the street ahead of him, and smiled when a young boy waved from the window of a passing school bus. Moments like these reminded him why he had chosen a life of service so many years earlier. Across the street, Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against his patrol vehicle, scanning pedestrians with the confidence of someone convinced his instincts were never wrong. After nearly 12 years on the force, he had developed a reputation for acting first and asking questions later. Some colleagues admired his decisiveness. Others quietly questioned the assumptions that often guided it. Ethan noticed Marcus almost immediately. His eyes lingered longer than necessary. Something about the older black man walking calmly toward the government district unsettled him, though he could not have explained why. Instead of letting the thought pass, he stepped away from the cruiser and moved directly into Marcus's path. Nearby conversations softened. A woman waiting for the crosswalk looked up from her phone. A delivery driver slowed his cart. The city continued moving, yet a strange stillness settled over that small corner of the sidewalk. Marcus stopped politely, meeting the officer's gaze without fear or frustration. His expression remained composed, the kind of calm that comes only from years spent making impossible decisions under enormous pressure. Ethan's voice broke the silence with official authority as he demanded identification, his tone carrying suspicion before any facts had been spoken. Marcus reached slowly toward his jacket, careful, respectful, giving every indication that he intended to cooperate fully. He had faced tense moments across continents and through decades of military service. Yet something about the way strangers had begun watching reminded him that not every battle announced itself with warning. Sometimes the greatest test of dignity arrived in the most ordinary place, disguised as a routine encounter, long before anyone realized history had quietly begun to unfold. Marcus slowly removed his wallet and presented his identification exactly as the officer requested, keeping both hands visible and every movement deliberate. Years of military service had taught him that calm often prevented situations from becoming worse, even when fairness seemed uncertain. Officer Ethan Brooks accepted the identification without a word, studying it only briefly before his expression hardened instead of softening. He looked from the card back to Marcus several times, as though the information in front of him refused to match the assumptions already formed in his mind. Around them, more pedestrians began slowing their pace. Some pretended to check messages on their phones while quietly observing. Others exchanged uncertain glances before continuing down the sidewalk. The silence carried an uncomfortable weight that everyone could feel, but no one wanted to interrupt. Marcus remained composed. "Officer," he said evenly, "I am expected at a federal meeting in less than 45 minutes. If there is a concern, I will gladly answer your questions." Ethan barely acknowledged the explanation. Instead, he examined the military identification again, turning it over in his hands as though searching for a flaw. "Interesting card," he replied with a skeptical smile. "Anyone can carry something that looks official these days." Marcus neither frowned nor protested. He simply maintained eye contact with the patience of someone who had spent an entire lifetime proving himself in rooms where others had underestimated him before he ever spoke. His measured silence contrasted sharply with the growing tension surrounding them. A young office worker quietly whispered to her coworker that the gentleman did not appear threatening at all. Across the street, a retired veteran wearing a faded baseball cap paused outside a coffee shop, narrowing his eyes as if Marcus seemed strangely familiar. Something about the older man's posture, his calm confidence, and the unmistakable bearing of disciplined service stirred an old memory that refused to surface completely. Ethan requested additional identification and questioned why Marcus was carrying government credentials while dressed like an ordinary civilian. Marcus explained that not every official assignment required a uniform, and that many senior military meetings involved plain clothes for practical reasons. His answer was factual, respectful, and direct, yet it seemed only to deepen the officer's suspicion. The secure folder tucked beneath Marcus's arm soon became the next focus. Ethan asked what was inside. Marcus answered honestly that the documents contained restricted material connected to an authorized Pentagon briefing and could not be opened on a public sidewalk. Those words immediately changed the atmosphere. Several people nearby exchanged nervous looks. The mention of classified government material sounded important enough to attract attention, but not enough to convince someone who had already decided what he believed. Ethan folded his arms and took a slow step closer. "Convenient answer," he said. "You expect me to believe you are carrying restricted documents through downtown Arlington without any escort?" Marcus answered with the same steady voice that had reassured soldiers during difficult missions across decades of service. "I expect you to verify the facts before reaching a conclusion." The sentence was neither confrontational nor emotional. It was simply a quiet appeal to professionalism. For a brief moment, even the city itself seemed to pause. Traffic continued flowing beyond the intersection, yet the small gathering on the sidewalk grew larger as more witnesses sensed that something significant was unfolding. Hidden behind the ordinary appearance of one respectful citizen stood a truth that no one present, especially Officer Ethan Brooks, had yet begun to understand. The retired veteran standing outside the coffee shop took one careful step closer, his weathered eyes fixed on Marcus with growing uncertainty. He had spent 30 years in uniform before hanging it up, and there were certain qualities that never disappeared from a soldier. The way Marcus stood with effortless balance, the quiet confidence in his voice, and the calm respect he showed even while being questioned reminded the old veteran of commanders he had once trusted with lives. He searched his memory, wondering where he had seen that face before. Officer Ethan Brooks, however, noticed none of it. His attention remained locked on the secure folder and the identification card still resting in his hand. To him, every calm answer sounded rehearsed. Every polite explanation appeared calculated. The possibility that he might be mistaken never seemed to enter his mind. Marcus glanced briefly at his watch. 38 minutes remained before the classified briefing was scheduled to begin inside the Pentagon. Missing the meeting would affect far more than his own calendar. Senior defense officials, strategic planners, and military leadership from multiple commands were already gathering. They expected General Marcus Ellison to lead the opening session concerning operational readiness and national security coordination. None of those people knew that one of the nation's highest-ranking officers was standing on a public sidewalk waiting for a routine conversation to become exactly that, routine. Marcus thought briefly of the words his father had shared decades earlier before he entered West Point. Character is measured most clearly when someone else has the power to misunderstand you. Those words had guided him through deployments overseas, humanitarian missions after natural disasters, difficult negotiations with allied commanders, and countless moments when patience accomplished what pride never could. Today, those same words echoed quietly in his thoughts once again. Across the street, more people had begun watching. A delivery driver discreetly started recording from a distance without saying a word. A young intern leaving a nearby office whispered that the older gentleman looked more like a professor than someone causing trouble. Another passerby simply folded his arms, waiting to see whether professionalism or assumption would decide what happened next. Ethan finally looked up from the identification. "You claim you have an important meeting," he said. "Then proving who you are should not be difficult." Marcus answered without hesitation. I have already provided government-issued identification. The next step is verification, not assumption. His voice remained steady, almost gentle, carrying neither anger nor sarcasm. The response frustrated Ethan more than open disagreement would have. He was accustomed to raised voices, excuses, or emotional reactions. Instead, he faced someone whose composure refused to crack. A second patrol vehicle rolled slowly toward the curb after noticing the growing crowd. Officer Daniel Ruiz stepped out, immediately sensing the unusual tension. Unlike Ethan, Daniel observed first before speaking. He noticed Marcus's posture, the military bearing impossible to fake, and the respectful tone that never changed despite the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Quietly, Daniel asked Ethan whether dispatch had verified the credentials yet. Ethan replied that he wanted to investigate further before making any calls. Daniel frowned almost imperceptibly. Verification usually came before conclusions, not after them. Marcus remained silent, understanding that sometimes the smallest decision could reveal the greatest truth about a person's character. Above them, an American flag fluttered gently from a nearby federal building, catching the morning sunlight as if reminding everyone that dignity, service, and respect were ideals meant to belong to every citizen equally, whether recognized immediately or only after the truth finally had its chance to be heard. Officer Daniel Ruiz glanced once more at Marcus before quietly speaking into his shoulder radio, requesting that dispatch verify the government identification through the appropriate federal channels. It was a simple procedural step, one that could have resolved the situation within minutes. Before the request was even completed, Ethan Brooks reached over and lowered Daniel's hand. "Not yet," he said firmly. "Something about this does not add up." Daniel looked surprised, but did not argue in front of the growing crowd. Instead, he stepped back, watching carefully as events continued to unfold. Marcus noticed the brief exchange without commenting. He understood that disagreements within organizations often happened silently, hidden beneath professional expressions and measured words. Looking at Ethan, he spoke with the same steady composure that had never wavered. "Officer, every minute matters. There are people expecting me. Please verify my credentials. That is all I am asking." Ethan shook his head slowly. People with nothing to hide usually cooperate without giving instructions. Marcus answered immediately. "Requesting verification is cooperation." The sentence lingered in the air, simple enough that several bystanders exchanged thoughtful glances. A woman standing near the corner lowered her phone for a moment and quietly remarked to the man beside her, "He has stayed respectful this entire time." The man nodded without taking his eyes off the scene. Across the street, the retired veteran finally remembered where he had seen Marcus before. Months earlier, he had watched a nationally televised ceremony honoring distinguished military leaders. The face, the voice, the unmistakable calm under pressure suddenly came together in his memory. His eyes widened slightly, but uncertainty held him back. Surely someone of that rank would not be standing alone on a city sidewalk being questioned over an identification card. The possibility seemed almost impossible, yet the resemblance became harder to ignore with every passing second. Marcus glanced once more toward the distant outline of the Pentagon, visible between government buildings under the bright morning sun. The classified briefing would begin in less than 30 minutes. Inside one of the secure conference rooms, senior officials from multiple branches of the armed forces were already assembling, reviewing schedules, and preparing reports. An empty chair remained at the head of the conference table, reserved for the officer expected to lead the discussion. No one inside the building imagined that an ordinary street encounter had already delayed the meeting before it even began. Ethan carefully examined the secure folder again. "If these documents are as important as you claim," he said, "then I have even more reason to make sure everything checks out." Marcus nodded slightly. "Then let the proper offices confirm them." Instead of answering, Ethan placed the folder where Marcus could no longer reach it while continuing his questioning. The gesture immediately changed the mood around them. Daniel frowned again, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. Procedure existed for a reason, and bypassing it rarely ended well. The retired veteran finally stepped forward, removing his baseball cap with quiet respect. "Officer," he said cautiously, "I think you may want to verify who this gentleman is before making any further decisions." Ethan barely glanced toward him. "Sir, This is an active investigation. Please remain where you are. The veteran slowly stepped back, disappointment settling across his face. Marcus remained exactly where he stood, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing even, and his dignity untouched by the growing tension. Around him, the morning city continued moving as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet for everyone gathered on that sidewalk, it had become increasingly clear that the truth was approaching one careful step at a time, and when it finally arrived, it would change far more than anyone expected. Marcus remained motionless, his attention never drifting from the officers in front of him. He had learned long ago that composure could be more powerful than argument, especially when emotions threatened to cloud judgment. The ticking seconds mattered, but allowing frustration to take control would accomplish nothing. He simply waited, believing that facts eventually found their own voice. Officer Daniel Ruiz quietly stepped a few feet away and attempted once more to contact dispatch through his radio, hoping to begin the verification process without creating unnecessary conflict. Before the transmission was completed, Ethan Brooks interrupted again, insisting that he wanted to ask several more questions first. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct developed through years of police work told him that confirming a person's identity should come before assumptions grew any larger. Even so, he reluctantly lowered the radio, unwilling to escalate disagreement in front of the public. The crowd had grown noticeably larger. Office workers paused on their way to nearby federal buildings. Tourists slowed their pace, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Several people quietly recorded from a respectful distance, while others simply watched with folded arms, uncertain whether they were witnessing a routine police encounter or the beginning of something far more significant. The retired veteran stood silently near the edge of the gathering, studying Marcus with increasing certainty. The memories became clearer now. He remembered watching congressional hearings, military ceremonies, and interviews featuring one of the Army's most respected senior leaders. The resemblance was no longer a passing thought. It felt undeniable. Yet disbelief kept him silent for another moment. It was difficult to imagine that a man trusted with national defense could appear so ordinary while standing alone without any visible sign of authority. Marcus finally broke the silence with a calm voice that carried neither fear nor resentment. "Officer Brooks, I understand your responsibility. I have respected every request you have made. I ask only that you extend the same respect to established procedure." Ethan answered without softening his expression. "Respect has to be earned." The words settled heavily over the sidewalk. A woman standing near the front of the crowd quietly shook her head. Another bystander whispered that respect should not depend on appearance. Daniel glanced toward Ethan but remained silent, recognizing that every additional minute was increasing the tension instead of resolving it. Marcus looked briefly toward the skyline where the Pentagon remained visible beyond the trees. 23 minutes remained before the classified briefing would begin. Inside the secure conference room, empty seats were slowly filling with generals, civilian defense officials, intelligence advisors, and senior planners from multiple commands. Conversations had already begun about schedules and contingency plans. One official checked his watch and quietly remarked that General Ellison was never late. Another suggested waiting a few more minutes before beginning. None of them imagined that the delay had nothing to do with traffic or scheduling. It had everything to do with assumptions made on an ordinary sidewalk only a few miles away. Marcus slowly returned his attention to Ethan. "There is one final option available if verification through your department is not possible," he said with quiet confidence. Ethan folded his arms. "And what would that be?" Marcus met his eyes with the same calm that had guided thousands of soldiers through moments of uncertainty. "Allow me to make one official phone call." For the first time since the encounter began, complete silence settled over the gathering. Even the passing conversations faded into the background as everyone sensed that whatever happened next would determine not only the outcome of this morning, but the reputation of every person standing on that sidewalk. Officer Ethan Brooks studied Marcus for several long seconds before finally reaching into the inside pocket of the charcoal jacket and handing him his cellular phone. "One call," he said. "That is all you get." His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the conversation would confirm every suspicion already formed in his mind. Marcus accepted the phone with a polite nod. "Thank you, officer." There was no trace of triumph in his voice, only quiet professionalism. The crowd leaned forward almost instinctively. Even those who had been whispering moments earlier fell silent, their curiosity replacing conversation. Daniel Ruiz watched carefully, sensing that the next few moments might answer every question that had been hanging over the sidewalk since the encounter began. Marcus entered a number from memory without hesitation. He did not search through contacts or pause to think. Years of responsibility had engraved certain numbers into his memory as permanently as his own name. The call connected after only a single ring. Marcus stood straight, his expression unchanged. "This is General Marcus Ellison," he said calmly. "Please connect me with the Pentagon Command Operations Center immediately." The confidence in his voice caused several people nearby to exchange surprised looks. There was no hesitation, no attempt to exaggerate authority, only the unmistakable cadence of someone accustomed to speaking with absolute precision. A brief pause followed. Marcus listened carefully before speaking again. "Yes, this is General Ellison. My authentication code is Delta 74 Echo 91. He paused once more, then continued in the same measured tone. "I am currently delayed approximately 2 miles from the Pentagon during a law enforcement identity verification. I will require immediate confirmation of my credentials through official channels." Officer Ethan crossed his arms, still unconvinced. To him, anyone could claim to be someone important over the telephone. Yet something subtle began changing around him. Daniel noticed it first. The confidence that had defined Ethan's posture since the beginning no longer appeared quite as absolute. Marcus listened quietly for another moment before responding. "Thank you. I will remain exactly where I am until your office completes the necessary coordination." He ended the call without another word and carefully handed the phone back to Ethan. "They are aware of the situation," Marcus said simply. "Someone will be contacting your department very shortly." Ethan forced a small smile. "We will see about that." Marcus offered no reply. Instead, he folded his hands comfortably in front of him and waited with remarkable patience. Less than 30 seconds passed before Daniel's shoulder radio suddenly came alive with an unusually urgent dispatch tone. Both officers instinctively looked toward the radio. The dispatcher spoke with a level of seriousness Daniel had rarely heard before. "Unit 12, acknowledge immediately. Repeat, acknowledge immediately. Arlington Command has requested direct communication with your location regarding an active federal verification." Daniel answered at once. Unit 12 responding. There was a brief pause before the dispatcher continued. "Stand by. You are about to receive instructions from the office of the chief." A noticeable stillness settled over everyone standing on the sidewalk. Even Ethan lowered his gaze toward the radio without speaking. Around them, the ordinary sounds of the city seemed strangely distant as the first invisible ripple from a single phone call quietly began moving outward, crossing agencies, command centers, and secure offices until it reached the very people who had been expecting General Marcus Ellison all along. Daniel Ruiz lifted the radio closer as every person standing nearby instinctively fell silent. The dispatcher's voice returned, now unmistakably formal. "Unit 12, Arlington Chief of Police requests that you maintain your current location. Repeat, maintain your current location. Officials from the Department of Defense are responding." Daniel answered quietly, "Understood." He lowered the radio slowly, his eyes moving from the device to Marcus, then toward Ethan, whose confident expression had begun to fade into uncertainty. "Department of Defense?" Ethan repeated under his breath, almost as though he expected someone to correct the words he had just heard. Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the intersection. Heads turned toward the avenue leading from the direction of the Pentagon. Within moments, several dark government sport utility vehicles entered the block in an organized formation, moving with calm precision rather than urgency. Their appearance alone changed the atmosphere. Traffic slowed naturally. Conversations stopped completely. No flashing lights demanded attention. No loud commands filled the air. Quiet professionalism accomplished what noise never could. The vehicles came to a smooth stop along the curb. Uniformed military police officers stepped out first, scanning the surroundings with disciplined awareness before opening the rear door of the lead vehicle. A senior Army lieutenant general emerged, accompanied by 2 civilian defense officials wearing Pentagon security credentials. Their movements were deliberate, composed, and unmistakably official. The retired veteran immediately removed his cap and stood at attention without thinking. Years after leaving the army, respect remained instinctive. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. He had never seen a response like this for what had begun as an ordinary street encounter. Ethan stood frozen, still holding Marcus's identification card in one hand and the secure folder in the other. The lieutenant general walked directly toward Marcus without hesitation. When he reached him, he offered a crisp salute and extended his hand. "Good morning, General Ellison. We apologize for the unexpected delay. The Secretary's office has been informed that you are safe." Marcus returned the salute with quiet dignity before shaking his hand. "Thank you, General Collins. I appreciate your prompt response." No raised voice. No dramatic announcement. Just one sentence, spoken naturally, that transformed every assumption made during the past 30 minutes into undeniable reality. Ethan's face lost its color as he slowly looked from Marcus to General Collins, then toward the Pentagon officials, now standing only a few feet away. Daniel inhaled quietly, realizing that every word Marcus had spoken from the very beginning had been completely truthful. One of the civilian officials approached Ethan politely. "Officer, may I have General Ellison's identification and briefing materials, please?" There was no accusation in his voice, only calm professionalism. Ethan immediately returned both items with visibly unsteady hands. The official examined the identification for only a brief moment before handing it back to Marcus with obvious respect. Around the sidewalk, whispers spread through the crowd. Several people lowered their phones, no longer watching out of curiosity, but out of admiration. The retired veteran smiled faintly, relief softening the concern that had been building inside him since the encounter began. Marcus carefully placed the identification inside his jacket and accepted the secure folder without the slightest sign of resentment. He thanked each official for coming before turning his attention back toward the two local officers. His expression remained exactly as it had been when the morning first began. Calm, steady, respectful. In that quiet moment, everyone present understood the same lesson without Marcus needing to say a single word. Real authority never needed to announce itself. It revealed itself through character long before rank was ever spoken aloud. For several long seconds, no one moved. The morning breeze carried the sound of distant traffic through the quiet street. Yet the small crowd remained completely still, as though everyone understood they had just witnessed something far greater than a routine police stop. Officer Ethan Brooks stared at the sidewalk, the confidence that had guided every decision only minutes earlier replaced by the unmistakable weight of realization. General Collins glanced briefly toward the local officers before addressing Marcus once more. "Sir, the Secretary has delayed the briefing until your arrival. Transportation is ready whenever you are." Marcus acknowledged him with a respectful nod, but made no effort to leave immediately. Instead, he turned his attention back toward Ethan and Daniel. Daniel Ruiz stepped forward first. "General Ellison," he said sincerely, "I owe you an apology. I should have insisted on completing the verification the moment your identification was presented." Marcus offered a faint, reassuring smile. "Officer Ruiz, professionalism begins with asking questions before reaching conclusions. You remembered that. Never lose it." Daniel lowered his head slightly, grateful for words that carried guidance instead of criticism. Ethan remained silent, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Every detail of the morning replayed inside his mind. The respectful answers, the repeated request for verification, the calm voice that never once became hostile despite being doubted again and again. He realized that the greatest mistake had not been asking questions. It had been deciding on the answer before allowing the facts to speak. Finally, Ethan looked up. "General," he said quietly, "there is no excuse for how I handled this situation. I failed to give you the professional respect every citizen deserves. I am truly sorry." The apology was simple, without rehearsed language or empty explanations. Marcus studied him for a brief moment before responding. "Officer Brooks, every badge carries authority. The challenge is remembering that authority exists to protect dignity, never to replace it." Those standing nearby listened carefully, recognizing that the conversation had become larger than the two men speaking. It was no longer about one encounter. It was about the choices made whenever assumptions appeared easier than understanding. General Collins watched silently, allowing Marcus to finish in his own way. Marcus continued with the same steady voice that had never changed throughout the morning. Throughout my career, I have commanded soldiers from every background imaginable. The strongest units were never built by people who looked alike. They were built by people who trusted one another enough to listen before judging. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Around them, several bystanders quietly stopped recording and lowered their phones. Somehow the moment felt too personal, too meaningful to reduce to another video shared across the internet. The retired veteran smiled with quiet pride, recognizing the leadership that had earned Marcus the respect of an entire military career. Moments later, Arlington's chief of police arrived and spoke privately with Ethan and Daniel. The conversation remained calm and professional, but its seriousness was unmistakable. Administrative review procedures would begin immediately so that every decision made that morning could be carefully examined according to departmental policy. Marcus neither requested punishment nor offered recommendations. He simply accepted his briefing folder, thanked the officials who had responded, and prepared to continue toward the Pentagon. Even after everything that had happened, his focus remained exactly where it had been from the beginning, serving his country with honor while hoping that the lesson learned on one ordinary sidewalk might quietly shape better decisions long after the morning itself had ended. General Marcus Ellison entered the waiting government vehicle without ceremony, offering one final nod to the officers before the door closed quietly behind him. The small convoy pulled away from the curb with steady precision, disappearing toward the Pentagon as the city gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Within minutes, pedestrians resumed their walks. Traffic flowed through the intersection once again, and the ordinary sounds of Arlington reclaimed the morning. Yet for everyone who had witnessed the encounter, nothing felt quite as ordinary anymore. Inside the secure conference room at the Pentagon, the atmosphere shifted the moment Marcus arrived. Senior military leaders rose from their seats, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect had always followed the man more faithfully than rank ever could. General Collins briefly explained that an unexpected delay had occurred and that the matter had already been addressed through the appropriate channels. Marcus simply thanked everyone for their patience and began the briefing exactly as scheduled. He did not mention what had happened outside. The mission before them mattered more than the misunderstanding behind him. Across town, however, the morning remained impossible to forget. Officer Daniel Ruiz completed his incident report with unusual care, documenting every decision honestly and completely. He promised himself that from that day forward, verification would always come before assumption, regardless of appearances or first impressions. Officer Ethan Brooks sat quietly inside the station after returning from the scene. The silence surrounding his desk felt heavier than any conversation could have been. He replayed Marcus's words again and again. Authority exists to protect dignity, never to replace it. Those words settled deeply because they challenged not only one decision, but an entire way of thinking. Over the following weeks, departmental review procedures concluded with additional training, policy discussions, and renewed emphasis on impartial decision-making. The experience became part of a broader conversation about professionalism, accountability, and the responsibility carried by every public servant. It was not remembered because an important man had been questioned. It was remembered because every person deserved to be treated with fairness before conclusions were reached. Months later, the retired veteran who had witnessed everything told the story to his grandchildren while looking at an American flag displayed in his living room. He did not speak first about generals, police officers, or government vehicles. He spoke about character. He explained that true strength was revealed when someone had every reason to become angry, but instead chose patience, wisdom, and grace. The children listened carefully, carrying the lesson with them long after the story ended. Somewhere inside the Pentagon, General Marcus Ellison continued serving his country exactly as he always had, never seeking recognition for what happened that morning because he understood something many people spend a lifetime learning. Titles can open doors. Uniforms can command attention. Positions can create authority. But character is the only thing that earns lasting respect. The sidewalk where everything began looked exactly the same the next day, yet an invisible reminder remained for everyone willing to remember it. Never assume that dignity has to introduce itself. Never mistake quiet confidence for weakness. And never forget that the strongest leaders rarely announce who they are, because the truth has a way of revealing itself when the time is right. He never needed to raise his voice. He never needed to demand respect. He simply carried both with him, and in the end, that was more powerful than any rank, any badge, or any title could ever be.